But because we need to get to zero emissions by 2050, we have to come up with an alternate way, which isn't too much more expensive, to perform those same activities without emitting any greenhouse gases. People have come up with alternative food, but what we're seeing is that it's hard to get more than a small market share. And those foods just don't taste the same. Saber's made an advance in the chemistry that's ultra different in terms of the environmental footprint, but it's as good as those real animal fats.
Bill Gates is investing billions in reshaping what and how we eat. But are we prepared for the changes he's planning? Gates is funding more than just food projects. He's backing alternative protein technologies, precision agriculture, and innovations that could redefine food as we know it. Will this reshape our food supply for the better? Or are there risks we're not seeing? Stay with us as we explore Gates' ambitious vision for the future of food and how his plans could impact farmers, consumers, and the entire global food system. Bill Gates has been putting his money into brands like Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods, and Upside Foods. Why? Because he thinks these alternative meat products are key to cutting back on meat consumption and tackling the environmental issues that come with animal farming. He's realistic. He knows that just convincing people to go vegetarian or vegan won't make a huge dent in meat consumption. That's where these plant-based and lab-grown meats come in. Because animal farming is a massive greenhouse gas emitter, responsible for around 14.5% of global emissions. A lot of that comes from methane, the fertilizers used, and the land cleared for grazing or livestock feed.
The one that has gone better than I would have expected 5 years ago is this work to make what's called artificial meat. And so you have people like Impossible or Beyond Meat, both of which I invested in.
You eat it as well, and you like it?
Absolutely.
You do.
You can go to Burger King and buy the Impossible Burger.
All right. Is it healthier for you or just healthier for the atmosphere?
It's slightly healthier for you in terms of less cholesterol. It's, of course, dramatic reduction in methane emissions, animal cruelty, manure management, and the pressure that meat consumption puts on land use.
But Gates admits we probably can't ever fully eliminate emissions, especially from livestock and fertilizers. While he thinks richer countries could lead the way with plant-based or lab-grown meat, he sees genetic improvements in livestock as more realistic for lower-income countries. He's not big on tree planting as a solution for offsetting carbon either. He's more into tech solutions, like direct carbon capture and investments in carbon-neutral technologies to make a real difference. He's pushing for wealthier nations to lean into synthetic beef, even though cost and taste aren't quite there yet. Because raising animals for food, cows, chickens, pigs, takes up a ton of resources. We're talking about loads of land, water, and energy, but with a relatively small amount of food in return. Let's break it down. Every kilogram of beef takes around 15,415 liters of water to produce. Compare that to chicken, which uses about 4,325 liters, and wheat, which only needs around 1,857 liters per kilogram. And because of this massive demand, animal farming has become a big driver of deforestation and soil damage. Believe it or not, around 70% of deforestation globally is tied to animal farming, yet animal products only give us about 18% of our global calories. Plant foods, on the other hand, deliver 80% of our calories and do it with way less land. Then there's the feed issue. To keep livestock going, we divert a lot of crops like corn and soybeans that could actually help address food shortages. Producing 1 calorie of beef takes about 20 times more energy than a calorie from vegetables. But here's the twist. More and more people want meat as populations grow, especially in parts of Asia. Demand for meat and dairy might spike up to 73% and 58% from 2010 to 2050.
Or people who use plant material where they haven't succeeded in matching the taste or the cost. I know they have new generations coming, so I'm hopeful that'll improve. But as you say, the cell-based approaches, they're not going to have a problem with the taste. Their challenge is very much the cost. But there's some great companies, including one called prolific. It looks like we may get there. So sometimes...
That's why lab-grown meat might be a game changer. It's made from animal stem cells grown in labs, so you don't need to raise entire animals. While it's pricey now, costs are dropping, and it comes with some perks. Lab meat could reduce antibiotic use, control fat levels, and mean better treatment for animals by reducing the number raised for food. But the challenge? It's expensive. Some people find it unnatural, and there are questions about whether it'll taste the same. And not only meat, Gates is pretty big on the idea that genetically modified crops and livestock can help reduce the damage we're doing to the planet. Recently, he pumped $12 million into a startup called Rumen 8 based in Australia. They're developing a seaweed-based supplement for cattle that cuts down on methane emissions. And since cows are a major source of methane, which is a huge contributor to global warming, the Rumen 8 supplement works by targeting methane in cows' burps and farts, and early trials show it's working, with an 85% reduction in emissions.
Another thing is that cows and other grass-eating species have a digestion system that emits methane, and methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas.
The goal is to speed up the commercialization of this tech and take it global. You might not know, but agriculture is the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, making up 24% of the total, right behind the energy sector. Things like deforestation also add to the problem, with soil carbon release contributing another 11% of emissions. On top of that, clearing forests means less natural carbon absorption. Gates says we've got to get innovative in the agriculture space, especially for small farmers. Other climate technologies Gates is supporting include an Indian company that's working on tannin-based cattle feed, and a company called Pivot Bio that's developing microbes to help fix nitrogen in the soil. There are also startups like Appeal and Cambridge Crops working on edible coatings to make produce last longer, which would cut down on food waste and the environmental impact of shipping. Gates is also backing alternatives to palm oil production to help slow down deforestation. When Gates did a Reddit AMA, he didn't hold back on his pro-GMO agenda. He made it clear that GMO foods are perfectly safe and have the potential to help fight hunger and malnutrition. He also slammed the idea that non-GMO foods are somehow better or healthier.
Right, so genetically modified organisms, that's where you create a new seed by using some biological approach that changes the gene. One example is you can put a gene in that prevents the plant from getting disease. And so a disease that's wiping out the crops of poor people and causing tens of thousands to starve, you can get rid of that.
His stance on this is backed by a lot of scientists. Groups like the National Academy of Sciences and the European Commission have all said GMOs are safe to eat. In fact, a 2016 study found no major risks linked to genetically engineered crops. And fun fact, most of the food we eat today has been genetically modified. Just through traditional breeding methods over time, probably what you had today for breakfast, lunch, or dinner contained a lot of GMOs. But the problem is, by 2050, the world's population is expected to hit 9.7 billion, with less land for farming and fewer people in rural areas. Plus, there's this problem too.
Maize would be about 30% of all the calories consumed in sub-Saharan Africa. So very, very key cereal crop. But as temperature comes in, it is sensitive to that temperature. For every degree above 30 degrees Celsius, you have the growing process breaking down more and more. And so each of those degrees per day cuts your yield by 1%. In other words, even if it was just 5 days at 35 degrees centigrade, you'd have a 25% productivity reduction. And that's what's projected just by the end of the decade. And if you go out to 2040, 2050, 2060, it gets substantially worse because even in the best case, climate's temperature increases are continuing.
So, we need smarter ways to grow food. That's where precision farming comes in. Thanks to tech like AI and the Internet of Things, IoT, farmers can manage resources like water, fertilizer, and pesticides more efficiently. This means less waste, a smaller environmental footprint, and higher crop yields. Technologies like GIS, remote sensing, and IoT give farmers real-time insights into things like soil health and crop conditions. Drones and satellites can zoom in on plants to check for stress or disease, while AI helps predict weather and spots pests early. When it comes to machinery, precision technology is making a big difference too. Take smart harvesters. They're using up to 20% less fuel. GPS-guided tractors and better engines are helping save fuel and cut down on emissions. In the future, we'll also see more electric and autonomous farm vehicles, hydrogen fuel cells, and even self-driving machines, all of which will cut emissions and help tackle labor shortages and land shortages. Speaking of land shortages, Bill Gates got into buying up a ton of farmland in 2013 when he started making these big purchases through his investment firm, Cascade Investment. Now, some people think that his interest in sustainability and green technology might explain why he's buying so much farmland, but Gates himself has said that the decision to invest was made by his team and it wasn't about climate change. Here's the thing, farmland is seen as a solid, long-term investment. The prices have been steadily going up over the years, and a lot of that is because of limited available land due to urban expansion. This has made farmland especially attractive to wealthy investors, especially after the 2008 financial crisis, when people were looking for safer bets. Fast forward, and Gates is now the largest private owner of farmland in the US. He owns a whopping 275,000 acres across 19 states, with most of it in places like Louisiana, Arkansas, and Nebraska.
I mean, there is a lot of land, and it's over about 18 different states, right? So we're talking about 70,000 acres in North Louisiana, around the Delta region, 14,000 acres in Florida, over 40,000 acres in Arkansas, over 14,000 acres in Washington. So it really just spans the country, and it is a lot of land.
But despite the rumors floating around, Gates doesn't even own 1% of all US farmland. Some conspiracy theorists have said he owns 80%, but that's just not true. In fact, he actually owns about 0.03% of it, which still makes him the biggest private landowner in the country. Why does he care so much about farmland? Well, part of it is the rise of agtech, agriculture tech, the increasing demand for plant-based proteins, and his interest in trying out new farming technologies. He's also all for plant-based meat substitutes, and sees farmland as a way to test out new, more sustainable practices to help fight climate change. He's more like a landlord, letting professional farmers continue doing what they do best. There's been some criticism about this, especially with younger farmers being priced out, but Gates has said that his goal is to make farms more productive and create jobs, not really change how farming is done. Over the past 15 years, US farmland has given investors a solid return of about 10 to 12%, which is a big reason why Gates is jumping in. The demand for food is rising, and Gates probably sees this as a way to capitalize on that, all while keeping an eye on global food security. As a result, lab-grown meat has been making waves. Upside Foods and Good Meat, two companies making lab-grown meat, just got the green light from the FDA and USDA to start selling it. And now, there's also this idea of lab-grown dairy, which could be a sustainable replacement for regular dairy and might actually do good for the environment. Lab-grown dairy is made through something called precision fermentation. Basically, they use microorganisms, like bacteria or yeast, that have been engineered to produce proteins and fats that mimic what's found in real animal milk. Bill Gates is also working on an artificial milk alternative made from single-cell proteins, which are rich in nutrients. This stuff is packed with protein and nutrients and has a creamy texture. The best part? Microorganisms don't need much land. They don't produce greenhouse gases, and they could be a game changer in solving global food challenges. This process has some big perks over plant-based dairy, especially when it comes to things like texture, taste, and even adding extra nutrients. Perfect Day, a company that makes lab-grown dairy products like ice cream and milk, has caught the attention of investors, especially in Silicon Valley. As people seek less processed foods, precision fermentation is seen as an eco-friendly solution. But there are challenges, like earning consumer trust and dealing with strict rules, such as the EU's strict labeling rules on calling lab-grown dairy milk. Still, more transparency and education could help people accept it. Lab-grown dairy uses up to 90% fewer resources and produces 70 to 90% less greenhouse gas and up to 99% less water than traditional dairy farming. While it may not fully replace regular dairy by 2050, it is likely to become a more sustainable option. But are these really necessary? Bill Gates says yes. If you check the reality, millions of small farmers in Africa and South Asia are already facing a real crisis because of climate change. It's messing with their crops, their livelihoods, and their ability to feed themselves and their communities.
As Ndidi said, the Green Revolution was a miracle. It raised productivity of 3 key cereal crops, but primarily for Asia. It didn't do a good job on the ecosystems in Africa or the wide variety of crops used there. And so the low productivity, less than a quarter of productivity in rich countries, is not enough to feed Africa.
But these farmers aren't just sitting back. They're coming up with smart solutions like early warning systems for crop diseases in Ethiopia and developing crops that can handle stress better across Africa. Still, things aren't looking great. The gap between what these farmers need and what they actually have is getting bigger. Climate predictions suggest that food production in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia is going to take a big hit, making poverty and hunger even worse. Here's where the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation steps in. They're putting a whopping $1.4 billion into helping farmers adapt to climate change. This includes backing things like digital tech, climate-smart farming methods, and empowering women in agriculture. And as of 2023, they're well on track to meet that goal. One of the key players they're supporting is CGIAR, a research organization that's come up with innovations like digital soil maps and tools that give farmers access to climate data. For every dollar invested in these solutions, they're seeing up to $10 worth of benefits for the farming communities. Now, the growing middle class is only making things worse because people are consuming more. So, unless we find ways to make all these systems low carbon, it's going to be tough. That's why funding for clean energy research has been going up over $3 billion annually since 2015. And one major part of this is vertical farming. It's been the talk of the town for the past decade. Back in the late 1990s, a guy named Dr. Dixon Despomier came up with this wild idea. What if we farmed in city buildings? He figured it could help solve big problems like climate change, overcrowding, and cities spreading out too much.
We believe now's the time for big data to solve some of our biggest challenges, including those in agricultural development. Take cassava, a powerful example of what breeding powered by the revolution in genomics can do. It's hard to breed cassava. The breeding cycle takes 5 years, which means it usually takes a full decade to release a new variety. But now, scientists can use computer algorithms to link sequence data from the cassava genome to the performance of cassava plants in the field. And this DNA sequence information is becoming much cheaper and easier to come by, benefiting farmers around the world.
The idea was that it could give us higher crop yields, keep produce fresh for longer, use way less land and water, and even grow pesticide-free food. Sounds awesome, right? But by 2021, reality hit. Many vertical farms faced some serious financial struggles, with layoffs and even bankruptcies hitting hard. The main issue? It's not as simple as it sounds. Even though vertical farming relies on some cool tech, like hydroponics and climate-controlled environments, it comes with some huge costs, especially for energy. Traditional farming, with its thousands of years of history, remains the more widespread method, and that's made it harder for vertical farming to catch on as quickly as some thought it would. For vertical farming to work, you need the right technology, affordable energy, supportive regulations, and a market that's ready for it. A lot of experts think vertical farming won't totally replace traditional farming, but it could definitely work alongside it, especially in cities where smaller farms could grow fresh food and cut down on the carbon footprint from transporting produce. Take iron ox, for example. This Silicon Valley startup uses robots and hydroponics to grow food with up to 90% less water, and they're planning to expand significantly. So, Bill Gates has put his money into a bunch of startups that are all about changing the way we think about food, from vertical farming, fermentation, to cell-based and plant-based proteins. Some of the companies he's backing are pretty cool, like Nobel Foods, which is working on plant-based cheese, and Nature's Find, which makes low-carbon protein from fungi. Then there's Beyond Meat, which is one of the leaders in plant-based meat. And Gates is also backing Impossible Foods, another big name in the realistic meat alternative game. He's even behind Upside Foods, a company doing cultivated meat. They've got the green light to sell lab-grown chicken.
Well, yes, your carbon footprint will go down dramatically if you don't eat meat. But one way to do that is to be a customer some portion of the time of these new ways of making ground beef that people like Beyond and Impossible and others are bringing out. Because as the demand for those goes up, they scale up their factories, they improve the quality, they get the price to come down. So whether it's an electric car or artificial burger, that demand is catalytic because we're trying to recreate what we saw with solar panels and lithium-ion batteries, where the volume actually brought the cost down.
Oh, and he's supporting Motif Foodworks, a company creating plant-based meats, and Eat Just, which focuses on plant-based eggs and cell-based meat, especially in Singapore. His main purpose is to reduce food waste as much as possible using technology. Because food waste is a huge problem around the world. Every year, about a third of all food produced for us to eat gets thrown away. That's around 1.3 billion tons of food wasted globally, due to poor planning, cooking too much, not storing things right, and ignoring leftovers. But good news, there are apps now that help us plan meals better. They let us create grocery lists so we only buy what we actually need, reducing waste. Some apps even give you recipes for using up those leftovers you'd normally forget about. Then there are food tracking apps that send reminders to use up food before it spoils, and smart fridges that can track what's inside and suggest recipes based on available ingredients. And it's not just about saving food for yourself, tech can help get food to people who really need it. There are platforms like ampleharvest.org that connect people and businesses with extra food to local charities and food banks, so it doesn't just get wasted. Even composting is easier now, with devices and apps to help break down food waste sustainably. Businesses can reduce food waste by using smart technology, like fridges with sensors and apps that track inventory, so food doesn't spoil or go unused. Donating extra food, composting scraps, and cooking with imperfect produce are great ways to cut down on waste. Programs like the USDA's Save the Food campaign are helping too. In fact, that's the major approach to improve food security for mankind, especially developing countries, where hunger and malnutrition are still big problems. And Bill Gates himself has been a strong supporter of improving food security. Through his foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, he has worked on projects to help solve these issues. By funding research into crops that can resist diseases, pests, and extreme weather, Gates aims to create a more reliable food supply in areas that struggle with food insecurity. This includes improving crops like rice, maize, and wheat, essential for many farmers. He also wants to give farmers the tools to handle changing climates. Because traditional farming often harms the environment and degrades the soil over time, Gates supports research into farming methods that are better for the environment and also practical for small-scale farmers. He believes that by combining better seeds, sustainable practices, and technology, we can increase food production and reduce hunger in many parts of the world. Plus, he got ties with organizations like the United Nations and the World Bank to promote food security and agricultural development. One important area where Gates has made an impact is in the regulation of genetically modified organisms, GMOs.
Yeah, what are called GMOs are done by changing the genes of the plant, and it's done in a way where there's a very thorough safety procedure, and it's pretty incredible because it reduces the amount of pesticide you need, raises productivity, can help with malnutrition by getting vitamin fortification, and So I think for Africa, this is going to make a huge difference, particularly as they face climate change, the increased productivity and resilience of the seeds, most of which will come from the new scientific techniques. So the gene editing just allows that to be done in a more precise way than it's ever been done in the past. So it'll accelerate the rate of innovation.
Bill Gates and his agribusiness partners are pushing for synthetic, lab-grown food using genetic engineering, including modified seeds, livestock, and microbes. Gates supports synthetic beef and products like the Impossible Burger and invests in companies like Ginkgo Bioworks to create custom organisms for processed foods. While promoting high-tech farming solutions to fight climate change, critics argue these methods favor large corporations over small farmers, especially in Africa. As Gates' influence in the food industry grows, some people worry about large corporations controlling the food system. Gates has invested in companies that work with GMOs, lab-grown meat, and plant-based proteins. While these innovations could change the food industry, there are fears that big corporations might dominate the market and push out smaller, independent farmers. This could lead to a situation where food production is controlled by just a few powerful companies, leaving local farmers and consumers with less power. Another concern is that, as companies patent seeds and farming technology, small farmers in developing countries might have to rely on expensive technologies controlled by these large companies. Critics say this could limit the freedom of local communities to grow their own food and manage their food systems. But Gates defends his investments, saying they are meant to solve food insecurity, not monopolize the market. What do you think? Another most debated issue in the future of food is the rise of lab-grown and synthetic foods. Bill Gates has supported alternative proteins, such as lab-grown meat, as a way to reduce the environmental impact of traditional animal farming. However, many people have concerns about synthetic foods. They worry about whether these foods are safe to eat and if they are natural. Some also question the long-term health effects of lab-grown meat and GMOs, as well as the potential risks they might bring to the food system.
The techniques we're using here were actually invented for human medicine. And in the case of human medicine, we don't have a total ban on all drugs that are created this way, nor do we have a total acceptance. What we do is each drug gets created, it's trialed, and then each country has scientists who look at, okay, what are the benefits and what are the risks of that new drug, and they decide. And it's a very sophisticated system that's trying to maximize human welfare. For plants, it's going to be the same.
There are also concerns that lab-grown meat could hurt rural economies that depend on animal farming. Additionally, some fear that only wealthy people will have access to these new foods, while poor communities are left behind. But looking ahead, Bill Gates is pretty optimistic about all these. He envisions a world where technological innovations help meet the food needs of a growing population, while minimizing harm to the planet. However, there are challenges to this vision. As technology becomes more widespread, it could lead to larger companies controlling more of the food industry. Additionally, some consumers may resist these new foods due to health concerns or cultural beliefs. The future of food will likely depend on a balance of technology, consumer preferences, and government policies. Gates hopes that technology can help solve food insecurity, but we must carefully consider the impact these changes will have on farmers, consumers, and the environment. So, as you can see, Bill Gates' plans for the future of food could revolutionize the industry. But are we ready for the changes ahead? What do you think about Gates' vision for food production? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more insights into the future of food and technology. See you soon.